I never believed in fate until the morning a letter arrived that was never meant for my hands. It changed everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and the quiet life I had built from silence and resignation. The autumn of 1847 had settled over Ravenswood Manor like a gray shroud, and I remember standing by the window of the morning room, watching the gardeners rake leaves into small pyres that smoldered at the edge of the east lawn. I was 24 years old and had been married to William Ashford, the Duke of Ravenswood, for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I knew the Count precisely because I had learned to measure my life in small increments, the way a prisoner marks time on a wall. Our marriage had been arranged by our fathers when I was barely 17, a union of land and legacy that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the debts my father had accumulated through poor investments and excessive pride. The Ashfords needed a wife of good breeding for their eldest son. My family needed salvation. And so I was sold, though no one would ever use such a crude word. They called it an alliance. They called it advantageous. They called it my duty. William was not cruel. I want to make that clear from the beginning, because what came later might suggest otherwise. He was simply absent, even when he stood before me. In the early months of our marriage, I had tried to reach him, to find some warmth beneath his formal courtesy. I would ask about his day, his interests, his childhood memories. He would answer in clipped sentences, his gray eyes fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder, as though I were a painting he had seen too many times to truly notice. By our first anniversary, I had stopped trying. By our second, I had stopped hoping. And by the morning the letter arrived, I had settled into a kind of peaceful numbness that I mistook for contentment. The footman brought the morning post on a silver tray, as he did every day at 9:30. There were the usual invitations to events I would attend alone or decline entirely, a letter from my mother filled with complaints about her health and pointed questions about when I might produce an heir. And at the bottom of the stack, a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. I almost set it aside with the others. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, a cramped and hurried script that spelled out a name that was not quite my husband's. It read W. Ashford with no title, no formal address. I assumed it was meant for William and that the sender had simply been careless with the direction. But something made me pause. Perhaps it was the color of the wax, a deep crimson that seemed almost urgent. Perhaps it was the faint scent of rose water that clung to the paper. Or perhaps it was simply that after 3 years of being ignored, I had grown reckless in small ways, seeking tiny rebellions where I could find them. I broke the seal. The letter inside was brief, barely half a page, written in the same hurried hand. I read it once without comprehension, then again with growing confusion, and then a third time as the words began to arrange themselves into meaning. "My dearest," it began, "I know you cannot come as often as we both wish, but the child asks for you constantly. She does not understand why her father cannot live with us, and I confess I struggle to explain it in terms a 4-year-old can comprehend. She has your eyes, you know. That same green that first captured my heart at Lady Pemberton's ball all those years ago. I have enclosed a small drawing she made, though I fear her artistic talents are not yet developed. She calls it Papa's house, and I did not have the heart to tell her she will likely never see it. Please come when you can. The nights grow long without you. Forever yours, M." I sat very still for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. My husband's eyes were gray, not green. His family had attended Lady Pemberton's ball for generations. But William had always complained of such events, preferring the solitude of his study to the crush of society. And most importantly, most devastatingly, we had no child. Despite 3 years of dutiful attempts that left me feeling more like a broodmare than a wife, my womb had remained empty, a failure that my mother reminded me of in every letter, and that my mother-in-law mentioned with increasing frequency at every family dinner. But someone had a child. Someone had a daughter with green eyes who drew pictures of a house she would never see. Someone signed their letters with the initial M and wrote of love in terms I had never experienced. The letter was not meant for William. The W. Ashford it addressed was someone else entirely. And in that moment, sitting in the pale autumn light of my morning room, I realized that my husband's family held secrets I had never thought to look for. I heard footsteps in the corridor and quickly folded the letter, sliding it into the pocket of my dress just as the door opened. It was Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, come to discuss the week's menus. I spoke with her about roasts and puddings and the proper way to prepare pheasant, and all the while my heart beat against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. When she left, I retrieved the letter and read it again. The drawing the writer mentioned was not enclosed, or if it had been, it had fallen out somewhere between its origin and my hands. I examined the envelope more carefully and noticed something I had missed before. The direction was smudged, as though it had been caught in rain. The words were barely legible, and I could see now how a careless postal worker might have misdirected it to our house instead of its intended destination. But who was the intended recipient? Who was W. Ashford, if not my husband? I thought of William's younger brother, Walter, who lived in London and visited only at Christmas and the occasional family obligation. He was everything William was not: warm, laughing, quick with a compliment, and generous with his attention. He had green eyes, I realized with a start, the same green as the emeralds in the family collection, the same green that the letter writer described in her daughter, Walter Ashford. The letter was meant for Walter. I should have felt relief. The secret child, the hidden love affair, the mysterious M who wrote of longing and lonely nights, none of it had anything to do with my husband. My marriage, such as it was, remained intact. I could fold the letter, send it on to its proper recipient, and pretend I had never seen it. But even as I considered this course of action, I knew I would not take it. For the letter had awakened something in me, a curiosity I had long suppressed, a hunger for truth that years of polite silence had nearly extinguished. Walter had a child. Walter had a lover. Walter had a life filled with passion and secrecy, and I wanted to understand why. More than that, I wanted to understand why a man who had everything, youth, charm, freedom, would hide a woman and child away like shameful secrets. Was M a servant? A woman of low birth whom society would never accept? Or was there some other reason, some darker explanation for the shadows in which they lived? I decided to say nothing to William. Our conversations were sparse enough that this omission would be easy to maintain. Instead, I would wait for an opportunity to speak with Walter directly, though I did not know when such an opportunity might arise. He was not expected at Ravenswood until Christmas, still 2 months away. But fate, having delivered the letter to my hands, was not yet finished with its interventions. That evening, as I dressed for dinner in the gown my maid had selected, a deep blue silk that William had once said suited my complexion, I heard raised voices from the floor below. This was unusual enough to make me pause at my dressing table. Ravenswood Manor was a house of whispers and careful courtesies, not arguments. I dismissed my maid and crept to the top of the stairs, where I could hear without being seen. The voices came from William's study, and though I could not make out every word, I recognized the speakers. William's cold, measured tones were unmistakable. And the other voice, passionate and pleading, belonged to Walter. He had arrived without warning, without the usual letter announcing his intentions. And whatever had brought him to Ravenswood, it was not a social call. I heard my husband say something about duty and discretion. I heard Walter respond with words like impossible and cruel and she deserves better. And then, clear as a bell in the sudden silence that followed, I heard Walter say a name that made my blood run cold. She knows, William. Somehow she knows. And if Eleanor finds out what you have done, it will destroy her. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out. They were speaking of me. Whatever secret bound these brothers together, whatever truth they guarded with such ferocity, it involved me in ways I did not yet understand. I returned to my room on silent feet and sat before my mirror, staring at my own reflection as though I might find answers in the pale face that looked back at me. My dark hair was pinned in the elaborate style that fashion demanded. My gray eyes, so like my husband's that guests often commented on the resemblance, held an expression I barely recognized. It was fear, yes, but also something else, something sharper. It was determination. I did not know what secrets Ravenswood Manor held. I did not know what William had done, or why Walter believed it would destroy me. But I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like winter frost, that I would not rest until I uncovered the truth. The letter in my pocket seemed to burn against my skin, a small flame of revelation in a house built on lies. At dinner that night, I smiled at my husband across the long mahogany table. I made polite conversation with Walter, who had been persuaded to stay despite whatever argument had preceded his arrival. I complimented the pheasant and declined a second glass of wine and retired early with claims of a headache. And when the house fell silent and the candles guttered low in their sconces, I lay awake in my empty bed and began to plan. I would discover what they were hiding. I would learn why a letter meant for Walter had shattered my carefully constructed peace. And I would find out why two brothers spoke of destroying me in hushed and urgent tones. The truth, I suspected, would be more painful than the ignorance I had cultivated for 3 long years. But I was done with ignorance. I was done with silence and resignation and the slow suffocation of a life half-lived. Whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes. The letter had set something in motion that could not be stopped. And though I did not know it then, that single misdirected envelope would lead me through betrayal and heartbreak to something I had never dared to hope for. It would lead me to love. The next morning dawned cold and bright, and I rose before the sun had fully crested the hills beyond the estate. Sleep had eluded me for most of the night, my mind turning over the fragments of conversation I had overheard like stones in a riverbed, searching for meaning beneath the surface. I dressed quickly, choosing a simple gray morning dress that required minimal assistance from my maid. I wanted to move through the house unnoticed, to observe without being observed, and the elaborate gowns that filled my wardrobe were ill-suited to such purposes. Walter was already in the breakfast room when I arrived, seated alone at the long table with a cup of coffee cooling before him. He looked up as I entered, and I saw something flicker across his handsome face. Surprise, perhaps, or was it guilt? "Good morning, Eleanor," he said, rising to his feet with the automatic courtesy that had been bred into him since childhood. "I did not expect to see you so early." "I could not sleep," I replied, which was true enough. I took my usual seat at the opposite end of the table and allowed the footman to pour my tea. The autumn chill seems to have settled into my bones. Walter studied me for a moment, his green eyes searching my face as though looking for something hidden there. I held his gaze steadily, revealing nothing. "William tells me you have been unwell," he said finally. "Headaches, I believe he mentioned." I smiled, a small and careful thing. "My husband is very attentive to my ailments," I said, allowing a hint of irony to color my words. "He notices them even when I do not mention them myself." Something shifted in Walter's expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been sympathy or might have been something else entirely. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form the words, the door opened and William entered. My husband's presence changed the atmosphere of the room the way a cloud changes the quality of light. The ease that had begun to build between Walter and me evaporated instantly, replaced by a formal tension that pressed against my skin like 2 tight stays. "You are both up early," William observed, taking his seat at the head of the table. His gray eyes moved between us, assessing, calculating. "I trust you slept well, Eleanor." "Tolerably," I said. "And you, my lord?" He did not answer, instead turning his attention to the newspaper that had been laid beside his plate. I watched him from beneath lowered lashes, this man I had married but never known, and wondered what secrets lived behind his impenetrable facade. The meal passed in near silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware and the occasional rustle of William's newspaper. When at last he rose and announced his intention to ride out to inspect the tenant farms, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. Walter made to follow him, but William held up a hand. "Stay and keep Eleanor company," he said, and though his tone was casual, I heard the command beneath the words. "She sees so few visitors. I am sure she would appreciate the diversion." And then he was gone, and Walter and I were alone once more. The silence stretched between us, uncomfortable and charged with unspoken things. I knew I should make polite conversation, should ask about his work in London, or his health, or any of the dozen meaningless topics that served to fill the empty hours of aristocratic life. But the letter burned in my pocket like a brand, and I found I could not pretend any longer. "I know about the child," I said. The words fell into the quiet room like stones into still water. Walter's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. His coffee cup rattled against its saucer as his hand trembled. "Eleanor," he began. But I shook my head. "Do not deny it. I have seen the letter. The one addressed to W. Ashford, meant for you, but delivered here by mistake. I know about M and the little girl with green eyes who draws pictures of a house she will never see." Walter closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "How much do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Only what the letter contained. But I suspect there is more, much more." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window where the autumn leaves drifted down like dying hopes. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with a weariness that seemed far older than his 30 years. "Her name is Margaret," he said. "We met 5 years ago at Lady Pemberton's ball. She was a governess then, employed by the Whitmore family. Beautiful and kind and so far above me in every way that mattered, though society would say otherwise. I felt my breath catch in my throat. A governess. A woman of education and refinement, but without the birth or fortune that would make her acceptable as a wife. We fell in love," Walter continued. "I know how that sounds, how foolish and romantic and naive. But it was true. Is true. I wanted to marry her, Eleanor. I went to my father with every intention of defying him, of giving up my inheritance if necessary to make her my wife. But he refused," I said softly. Walter laughed, a bitter sound without mirth. Refused is too gentle a word. He threatened to destroy her, to see her cast out without a reference, to spread rumors that would make her unemployable in any respectable household. He said he would rather see me dead than married to a governess. I thought of the old Duke, William and Walter's father, who had died 2 years before my marriage. I had met him only once, a cold and imperious man whose approval seemed as distant and unattainable as the stars. I could well believe he would make such threats. "So you gave her up," I said. "I told her I would wait, that when my father died I would be free to marry whom I pleased." But then Walter's voice broke, and he paused to collect himself. Then she told me she was with child. The weight of his words settled over me like a physical thing. I understood now why Margaret lived in shadows, why her daughter dreamed of a house she could never enter. An illegitimate child was a stain that could never be washed clean, a mark of shame that would follow both mother and daughter for the rest of their lives. "Your father never knew?" I asked. "He died believing I had ended the affair. I let him believe it. I let everyone believe it. I set Margaret up in a small house outside London, and I visit when I can, which is never often enough. Our daughter is 4 years old now, and she calls me Papa, and every time I leave her, it tears my heart in two." Tears had begun to slip down his cheeks, and he made no move to wipe them away. I felt something crack open in my chest, some wall I had built without knowing it. Here was a man who loved deeply, who sacrificed his own happiness to protect the woman he adored, who wept openly for a child he could not claim. It was so different from the cold emptiness of my own marriage that I could hardly comprehend it. "But I do not understand," I said slowly. "What does any of this have to do with me? Last night, I heard you arguing with William. You said that if I found out what he had done, it would destroy me. What did you mean?" Walter's face, already pale, went white as chalk. He rose abruptly from his chair and moved to the window, his back to me, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I should not have said that," he murmured. "I was angry and afraid, and I spoke without thinking. But you did say it, and I heard you." I stood as well, moving toward him, refusing to let him retreat into silence. "Walter, please. I have lived in ignorance for 3 years. I have smiled and curtsied and played the role of the perfect wife, while my husband treats me as nothing more than a piece of furniture. I deserve to know the truth." He turned to face me, and the anguish in his eyes made me take a step back. "You do deserve to know," he said, "but I am not the one who should tell you. This is William's secret, not mine. Then I will ask William." Walter caught my arm, his grip gentle but urgent. "No. Eleanor, you must not. Not yet. There are things in motion that you do not understand. Things that could put you in danger if you confront him before we are ready." "We?" I repeated. "Who is we?" Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the drive. William had returned far sooner than expected. Walter released my arm and stepped back, composing his features into a mask of casual unconcern. "Trust me," he said quietly. "Give me time to explain everything properly. Can you do that?" I looked into his green eyes, so warm and earnest and utterly unlike his brother's cold gray gaze, and I found myself nodding. "For now," I said, "but I will not wait forever." He smiled then, a sad and grateful thing that transformed his handsome face. "I know," he said, "and I promise, Eleanor, when you learn the truth, you will understand why we have guarded it so carefully, and perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps you will even find some happiness in it." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened and William strode in, bringing with him the scent of horses and cold autumn air. His eyes swept the room, taking in Walter by the window and me standing a few feet away, and something flickered in their depths. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said, his tone making clear that he hoped nothing of the sort. "Not at all," I replied smoothly. "Your brother was just telling me about his work in London. He has been so kind in keeping me company." William's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. "Indeed," he said. "How fortunate that he could spare the time." The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and careful silences. I watched William and Walter circle each other like wary animals, their conversation pleasant on the surface, but charged with undercurrents I could not fully interpret. And through it all, I turned Walter's words over in my mind, searching for meaning. What had William done? What secret was so terrible that it could destroy me? And why did Walter speak of happiness in the same breath as the truth? That night, I dreamed of a little girl with green eyes, standing at the gates of Ravenswood Manor, reaching through the iron bars toward something she could not grasp. And when I woke in the gray light of dawn, I found my pillow damp with tears I did not remember shedding. The truth was close now. I could feel it hovering at the edges of my awareness, waiting to be found. And though part of me feared what I would discover, a larger part knew that I could not turn back. The letter had opened a door I could not close, and somewhere beyond it lay answers that would change everything. I only hoped I was strong enough to face them. 3 days passed before Walter found the opportunity to speak with me alone again. 3 days of watching and waiting, of smiling at my husband across silent dinners, of lying awake in my cold bed while questions circled my mind like carrion birds. On the 4th morning, William announced his intention to travel to London on business. He would be gone for at least a week, perhaps longer. I received this news with the appropriate wifely concern, asking if I might accompany him, and knowing even as I spoke that he would refuse. "The city air would not agree with you," he said, barely glancing up from his correspondence. "You are better off here. Walter will remain to keep you company." And so my husband departed in a cloud of dust and indifference, and I was left alone with a man who held secrets that could shatter my world. Walter found me in the library that afternoon, curled in the window seat with a book I had been pretending to read for the better part of an hour. The autumn sun slanted through the glass, painting golden patterns on the worn carpet, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other, two people standing on the edge of a precipice, gathering courage for the fall. "It is time," I said finally. "Tell me everything." Walter sat down across from me, his face grave and gentle. He had dark circles beneath his eyes, as though he too had been robbed of sleep by the weight of what he knew. "Before I begin," he said, "I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will be painful. It will make you question everything you believe about yourself, about your life, about the people you thought you knew. But I swear to you, Eleanor, on everything I hold sacred, that I would not tell you if I did not believe it would ultimately set you free." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. He took a deep breath. "It begins with your mother. Or rather, with the woman you call your mother." The words made no sense at first, like a sentence spoken in a foreign tongue. I stared at him, waiting for clarification, waiting for meaning to emerge from the confusion. "Lady Hartwell is not your mother," Walter continued, his voice soft but steady. "She raised you, yes. She loved you in her way. But she did not give birth to you." "That is impossible," I whispered. "I have seen the portrait painted when I was an infant. I have heard the stories of my birth, the difficult labor, the weeks of recovery, all fabricated. A carefully constructed lie designed to hide the truth of your origins." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the window seat, anchoring myself to something solid while the world dissolved into chaos. "Then who?" I managed. "Who is my mother?" Walter reached into his coat and withdrew a small, faded photograph, the kind that had only recently become available to those wealthy enough to afford them. He held it out to me, and I took it with trembling hands. The woman in the image was young, perhaps 18 or 19, with dark hair and gray eyes that looked startlingly familiar. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the elaborate gowns of the aristocracy, and she held a bundle in her arms that could only be an infant. "Her name was Catherine Moore," Walter said. "She was a lady's maid in the Hartwell household. And she was your mother." I could not breathe. I could not think. I could only stare at the photograph, at this stranger who shared my face, who had given me life and then vanished from it entirely. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "She died." Walter's tone was infinitely gentle. "Shortly after you were born. There were complications from the birth, and she did not survive." Tears blurred my vision, falling onto the photograph, onto the face of a mother I had never known. But why? Why would Lady Hartwell claim me as her own? Why would she raise a servant's child as her daughter? Because of who your father was? The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I looked up at Walter, and the compassion in his eyes told me that the worst was yet to come. "Your father," he said slowly, "was the old Duke. William's father. My father." The photograph slipped from my fingers, falling soundlessly to the carpet. I felt as though I had been struck, as though all the air had been driven from my lungs by a single devastating blow. "No," I said, "no, that cannot be true. I wish it were not. But I have seen the documents myself, the letters between my father and Lady Hartwell arranging for your care, the payments made to ensure your comfortable upbringing, the agreement that you would be married into our family when you came of age." "Married into your family." The words echoed in my mind, taking on new and terrible meaning. "I am your sister," I said, "your half-sister." And William? I could not finish the sentence. The horror of it closed my throat like a fist. "William knows," Walter said quietly. "He has always known. Our father told him before the wedding, made him understand that it was necessary to keep the family secret contained. A scandal of this magnitude would have destroyed us all. But he married me," I gasped. "Knowing what we are to each other, he still married me. He saw it as a duty, a sacrifice for the family honor. He has never," Walter paused, his face flushing. "He has never claimed his husbandly rights, has he?" I thought of the cold, perfunctory visits to my bedchamber that had ceased entirely after the first year. The way William flinched when our hands accidentally touched. The distance he maintained, always the distance, as though proximity to me caused him physical pain. "Never truly," I whispered. "I thought it was because he found me unappealing. I thought I had failed somehow, that I was not enough." "You were too much," Walter said fiercely. "You were a constant reminder of our father's sin, a living symbol of everything he despised about himself. William hates what was done to you, Eleanor. He hates himself for being part of it." But he could never bring himself to tell you the truth. The library swam around me, the books and furniture blurring into meaningless shapes. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to win my husband's affection, all the nights I had cried myself to sleep wondering what was wrong with me, why I could not make him love me. And all along, the answer had been this monstrous truth that made our marriage not just loveless, but obscene. "I think I am going to be sick," I said, and Walter was at my side instantly, helping me to a chair, pressing a cool hand to my forehead. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe. I know this is overwhelming. I know it feels like the end of everything. But Eleanor, it is not. It is the beginning." "The beginning of what?" I demanded, anger rising through the shock. "The beginning of my life as a fraud? As the bastard daughter of a duke who could not even acknowledge me? As the wife of a man who is also my brother?" "The beginning of your freedom," Walter said. "The marriage can be annulled. It was never consummated, never legal in the eyes of God or the church. You can be free of William, free of this house, free of the lie that has imprisoned you since birth." I stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "Free?" He took my hands in his, and I noticed for the first time how warm they were, how steady. "Yes," he said, "free to live as you choose, free to be loved as you deserve." There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, that made my heart stutter in my chest. "Walter," I began, but he shook his head. "Not now," he said softly. "There will be time for that conversation later, when you have had a chance to absorb all of this. For now, you need only know that you are not alone. You have never been alone, even when you felt most abandoned." I wept then, great racking sobs that shook my entire body. I wept for the mother I had never known, for the years lost to a marriage built on lies, for the girl I might have been if the truth had been told from the beginning. And through it all, Walter held me, steady and warm and present in a way that no one had ever been before. When at last my tears subsided, I looked up at him with swollen eyes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "we wait for William to return, and when he does, you will confront him. You will demand the annulment that should have been granted years ago. And then, Eleanor, you will begin the life you were always meant to live." I thought of the photograph still lying on the carpet, of Catherine Moore's gray eyes so like my own. She had been a servant, powerless and unprotected, and she had paid the ultimate price for a powerful man's desire. But I was not powerless. I had knowledge now, and with knowledge came strength. "I will do it," I said, and my voice did not waver. "I will face him, but I want to know everything first. Every detail, every document, every letter. I will not go into this battle unarmed." Walter smiled, and in his green eyes I saw something that looked remarkably like pride. "I would expect nothing less," he said. "Come, there is a locked room in the east wing where my father kept his private papers. I have the key." I rose on unsteady legs, brushing the tears from my cheeks. The sun had shifted while we talked, and the library was now filled with the amber light of late afternoon. It felt like emerging from a dark cave into blinding brightness, painful but necessary. As we walked through the silent corridors of Ravenswood Manor, I realized that the house looked different to me now. The portraits on the walls, the old Duke's face repeated again and again in paint and gilt frames, no longer seemed imposing. They seemed pathetic. A man so obsessed with legacy and bloodlines that he had committed an unforgivable act and then spent the rest of his life hiding from it. I was his legacy too, I realized. His unwanted, unacknowledged legacy. And I would not be hidden any longer. The locked room waited at the end of a narrow hallway, its door plain and unassuming. Walter produced a small brass key and turned it in the lock, and together we stepped into the shadowed space where all my answers waited. The truth, I was learning, was a double-edged sword. It could wound and it could heal. It could destroy and it could liberate. I was ready to wield it. The documents in my father's hidden room told a story of calculation and cowardice that made my stomach turn. Letters between the old Duke and Lady Hartwell, negotiating the terms of my upbringing like merchants haggling over goods. Financial records showing the payments made to ensure my comfortable imprisonment in a life that was never truly mine. And most damning of all, a copy of the marriage contract between William and myself, with a clause I had never seen, stipulating that the union was to remain unconsummated unless I specifically requested otherwise. They had planned everything. Every detail of my existence had been choreographed to serve their purposes, to contain their scandal, to ensure that the sins of the father would never come to light. I spent 3 days reading through those papers, committing their contents to memory, building my case like a barrister preparing for trial. Walter stayed close, bringing me meals I barely touched, answering my questions with patient honesty, watching over me with a tenderness that I was only beginning to understand. On the 4th day, William returned. I heard his carriage on the drive and felt my heart begin to pound. All my preparation, all my careful planning seemed to evaporate in an instant, leaving only raw emotion and the desperate need to finally speak the truth. Walter found me in the morning room, standing at the window with my hands clenched at my sides. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and I leaned into his touch without thinking. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I admitted, "but I do not think I ever will be, and I cannot wait any longer." He turned me to face him, his green eyes searching mine. "Remember that you are not alone in this. Whatever happens, I will be here. I will not abandon you." I knew in that moment that his words meant more than simple support. There was a promise in them, a declaration that neither of us was ready to speak aloud, but that hung between us like morning mist, waiting to be burned away by the rising sun. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, a gesture that sent warmth flooding through my veins. Then he released me and stepped back, his expression shifting to one of calm determination. "Go," he said, "face your demons, and when you are done, come find me." I walked through the corridors of Ravenswood Manor as though walking to my own execution. Each step felt weighted, significant, the final paces of a journey that had begun with a misdirected letter and would end with the destruction of everything I had known. William was in his study, still dressed in his traveling clothes, sorting through correspondence that had accumulated in his absence. He looked up as I entered, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps? Or was it fear? "Eleanor," he said, "I did not expect to see you so soon. I trust you are well." "I am not well," I replied, closing the door behind me. "I am very far from well, and I believe you know why." His face went carefully blank, the mask he had worn throughout our marriage sliding into place. I am sure I do not understand. Then let me explain. I moved to stand before his desk, refusing to sit, refusing to place myself in a position of supplication. I know the truth, William. I know about Catherine Moore. I know about your father. I know what I am and what our marriage truly is. For a long moment, he did not move. Then slowly, he set down the letter he had been holding and looked up at me with eyes that held an emotion I had never seen in him before. It was relief. "How long have you known?" he asked, and his voice was different too, stripped of its usual coldness, raw and human in a way that startled me. "A week," Walter told me. "He showed me the documents in your father's private room." William closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "I have wanted to tell you," he said. "Every day for 3 years, I have wanted to confess everything and beg your forgiveness. But I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. Protecting yourself from what? From your hatred. From the look I see in your eyes right now. From the knowledge that I participated in something monstrous and can never undo it. I had expected denial. I had expected cold dismissal or calculated manipulation. I had not expected this. My husband, my brother, sitting before me with tears tracking down his cheeks, his carefully constructed walls crumbling to dust. "Why did you agree to it?" I asked, my voice softer than I had intended. "You could have refused. You could have told me the truth before the wedding." "I was 22 years old," William said. "My father was dying, and his final wish was that I marry you, that I keep the family secret safe. He said it was the only way to protect you, to ensure you would always be provided for." I believed him. I was young enough and foolish enough to believe that duty could substitute for honesty. He rose and moved to the window, his back to me, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his confession. "I tried to be a good husband to you, Eleanor. Within the constraints of what I knew, I tried to give you comfort and security, but I could never give you love. Every time I looked at you, I saw my father's sin. Every time I touched you, I felt like I was compounding the crime. So I withdrew. I told myself I was sparing you, but I was only sparing myself. The anger I had carried for days began to soften, replaced by something more complex. I could not forgive what had been done to me, but I could see now that William was as much a victim of his father's machinations as I was. We had both been trapped in a prison of someone else's making. "I want an annulment," I said. He turned to face me, and I saw that the tears had stopped, replaced by a calm acceptance that made him look older than his years. "Of course," he said, "it is your right. The marriage was never legal, never consummated, never anything more than a convenient fiction. I will sign whatever papers are necessary. And afterward? Afterward, you will be free. You can go wherever you wish, do whatever you choose. I will ensure you have sufficient funds to live comfortably. It is the least I owe you." I studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. For the first time since our wedding day, I felt that I was seeing the real William Ashford, not the cold and distant Duke, but the damaged man beneath the title. "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me." He turned back to the window, his voice rough. "I do not deserve your gratitude. I have stolen 3 years of your life, and I can never give them back." I left him standing there, silhouetted against the gray autumn light, and made my way through the house to find Walter. He was waiting in the garden, pacing among the dying roses, and when he saw me approaching, he broke into a run. "What happened?" he demanded, catching my hands in his. "Are you all right?" "I am going to be free," I said, and the words felt strange on my tongue, unfamiliar, but wonderful. He agreed to everything. The annulment will proceed. Walter's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him look young and hopeful and impossibly handsome. "Eleanor," he breathed, "I am so glad." We stood there in the garden, hands clasped, the cold wind whipping at our clothes and hair. And then, without thinking, without planning, I stepped forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was brief and chaste, hardly more than a brush of skin against skin. But it sent electricity coursing through my body, awakening feelings I had never experienced, desires I had never known I possessed. When I pulled back, Walter was staring at me with an expression of wonder. "Eleanor," he said again, but this time my name was a prayer. "I know it is too soon," I whispered. "I know there are still so many complications. Your Margaret, the child, my own tangled past. But I needed you to know that I feel, that I want." I could not finish the sentence. The emotions were too large, too new, too overwhelming to be contained in words. Walter raised a hand to my face, cupping my cheek with infinite gentleness. "There is something I must tell you," he said, "about Margaret, about why I came to Ravenswood in such a hurry." I felt a flutter of fear. "What is it?" "She is dying, Eleanor. The consumption has been progressing for months, and the doctors say she has weeks at most. That is why I argued with William that night, why I was so desperate to resolve matters quickly. I wanted her to know that our daughter would be cared for, that she would have a family when Margaret is gone." Tears sprang to my eyes, not of jealousy, but of compassion. "Oh, Walter," I said, "I am so sorry." "She knows about you," he continued. "I told her everything, about your situation, about the truth of your birth, about my feelings. And she," Walter's voice broke, "she gave us her blessing. She said that loving you was not a betrayal of her, that hearts are large enough to hold more than one love." I wept then, for Margaret whom I had never met, for her generosity in the face of death, for the strange and sorrowful circumstances that had brought Walter and me together. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now," Walter said, "we go to London. I want you to meet her before it is too late. I want you to meet your niece." Niece. The word struck me with sudden force. The little girl with green eyes was not just Walter's daughter. She was my blood relative too, the niece I had never known existed. "Yes," I said, "take me to them." We left Ravenswood the next morning, traveling by carriage through the grey autumn countryside toward London. William stood on the steps to see us off, his face pale but composed. "Take care of her," he said to Walter. And then to me, "I hope you find the happiness you deserve, Eleanor. Truly I do." It was the kindest thing he had ever said to me, and I carried it with me like a talisman as the carriage rolled away, taking me toward an uncertain future that held more promise than any certainty I had ever known. The letter that had started everything lay folded in my pocket, a reminder of how quickly fate could intervene, how a single misdirected envelope could change the course of a life. I did not know what awaited me in London. I did not know if love could bloom in the shadow of death, or if I could become a mother to a child I had never met. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. I felt hope. The house where Margaret lived was small and neat, tucked away on a quiet street in Hampstead, where the air was cleaner than in the heart of the city. Walter had chosen it carefully, he told me, wanting to give her and the child the best chance at health and happiness that circumstances would allow. I stood on the pavement outside, my heart racing, my gloved hands trembling at my sides. In a few moments, I would meet the woman who had loved Walter for 5 years, who had borne his child in secret and shadows, who was now preparing to leave this world. I did not know what to say to her. I did not know if I had the right to say anything at all. Walter took my hand. "She wants to meet you," he said gently. "She asked for you specifically." "Why?" "Because she knows I love you. And she wants to see for herself that her daughter will be in good hands." The door opened before I could respond, and a middle-aged woman in a plain dress ushered us inside. The house was simply furnished but spotlessly clean, with fresh flowers in a vase on the hallway table and the smell of baking bread drifting from somewhere in the back. "She is awake," the woman said, her voice low, "but she tires easily. Please do not stay too long." We climbed the narrow stairs to a bedroom at the front of the house, where afternoon light filtered through lace curtains and fell across a bed where a woman lay propped against pillows. Margaret was beautiful, even in illness. Her dark hair spread across the white linens like spilled ink, and her eyes, large and luminous, held a peace that seemed impossible given her circumstances. She was thin, painfully so, her cheekbones sharp beneath translucent skin, but when she smiled, it transformed her entire face. "So you are Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I have heard so much about you. Please, sit." I took the chair beside her bed, overwhelmed by emotions I could not name. "Thank you for seeing me," I managed. "I know this must be strange for you." "Strange?" Margaret laughed, a small sound that turned into a cough. She recovered quickly and continued. "My dear, my entire life has been strange. A governess who fell in love with a duke's son, a mother who cannot claim her own child, a dying woman who must entrust her daughter to a stranger. Strangeness is all I know." "I am so sorry," I said, and the words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of her suffering. "Do not be sorry." Margaret reached out and took my hand, her fingers cold but her grip surprisingly strong. "I have had 5 years of love that most women never experience. I have a daughter who is the light of my existence. And now I have the comfort of knowing she will be cared for by people who will love her as I do." Tears streamed down my face, and I did not bother to wipe them away. "I will love her," I promised. "I will be the best mother I know how to be. I know you will." Margaret's eyes moved to Walter, who stood by the door, his own cheeks wet. "And you, my darling, be happy. That is all I ask. Be happy with her." Walter crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, taking Margaret's other hand. "I will always love you," he said. "Nothing will ever change that." "I know. But love is not a finite thing. It grows, it expands, it makes room." She looked at me again, her gaze penetrating. "You understand that, do you not, Eleanor? You understand that his love for you does not diminish what we shared?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Good." "Now," she said, releasing both our hands, "there is someone else who would like to meet you." She rang a small bell on the bedside table, and a moment later, the door opened and a child walked in. I had seen her in my imagination 100 times since reading the letter, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of her. She was small for 4 years old, with dark hair that curled around her face and green eyes that were exact copies of Walter's. She wore a simple white dress and carried a rag doll clutched to her chest, and she looked at me with the wary curiosity of a child who has learned that strangers cannot always be trusted. "Rose," Margaret said, her voice soft with love. "This is the lady I told you about, the one who is going to take care of you when I go to heaven." The child studied me solemnly. "Are you nice?" she asked. "I hope so," I replied, sinking to my knees so that our eyes were level. "I will try very hard to be." Rose considered this for a moment. "Do you like dolls?" "Very much. This is Maisie." She held out the rag doll for my inspection. "Papa gave her to me." "She is beautiful," I said. "Almost as beautiful as you." A smile broke across Rose's face, transforming her from wary to radiant in an instant. "I like you," she announced. "You can stay." I laughed through my tears, and when Rose climbed into my lap without hesitation, wrapping her small arms around my neck, I felt something crack open in my chest. It was not heartbreak this time. It was the opposite. It was my heart expanding, making room for this child who needed me, whom I already loved with a fierceness that surprised me. We stayed for an hour, the 4 of us together in that small room where death waited patiently in the corners. Margaret told me stories of Rose's birth, her first words, her favorite games. Walter held his daughter on his lap and read to her from a book of fairy tales. And I sat beside the bed of a dying woman and felt, impossibly, that I had found a family. When it was time to go, Margaret asked to speak with me alone. Walter took Rose downstairs, promising her a treat from the kitchen, and I returned to the chair beside the bed. "Thank you," Margaret said simply. "For what?" "For being kind, for loving him without jealousy or resentment, for accepting Rose without hesitation." She paused, gathering strength. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am going to ask anyway." "Anything," I said. "Name it. Do not let her forget me. Tell her stories of her mother. Keep my memory alive in her heart. And when she is old enough to understand, tell her that I loved her more than life itself, that leaving her is the hardest thing I have ever done, and that I will be watching over her always." I took her hand and pressed it to my cheek. "I promise," I said, "she will know you. She will love you. And she will grow up knowing that she was wanted, cherished, treasured." Margaret smiled, and in her smile I saw the peace of someone who has made their peace with the inevitable. "Thank you." Eleanor Ashford, or should I say, Eleanor Moore. The use of my birth mother's name startled me. "You know?" Walter told me. "About your mother, about the Duke, about the marriage." She squeezed my hand. "We are more alike than you might think, you and I. Both of us loved by men who could not claim us publicly, both of us forced to live in shadows. But your shadows are lifting now. Walk into the light, my dear, and take my daughter with you." I kissed her forehead before I left, a gesture that felt both intimate and natural. She closed her eyes, exhausted, and I slipped from the room with a heart that was simultaneously breaking and healing. Margaret died 2 weeks later, on a quiet November morning, when the first frost silvered the windows of her little house. Walter was with her at the end, holding her hand as she slipped away, and I stayed downstairs with Rose, reading her stories and singing her songs, keeping her safe from the sorrow that waited upstairs. The funeral was small and private, attended only by Walter, myself, the housekeeper who had cared for Margaret in her final months, and Rose, who wore a black dress and held my hand throughout the service. She did not fully understand what had happened, but she knew that her mother had gone to heaven and that she would not be coming back. "I will take care of you," I whispered to her as we stood beside the grave. "I promise, my darling. I will love you and protect you for the rest of my life." She looked up at me with those green eyes so like her father's. "Forever?" she asked. "Forever." The annulment of my marriage was granted in January, on a cold day when snow blanketed London in white silence. William signed the papers without protest, and just like that, 3 years of pretense were erased. I was no longer the Duchess of Ravenswood. I was simply Eleanor, a woman without title or position, but with something far more valuable: freedom. Walter and I were married in the spring, in a small church in Hampstead not far from the house where Margaret had lived and died. Rose served as our flower girl, scattering petals down the aisle with solemn concentration, and when the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, she cheered so loudly that the congregation laughed. We did not return to Ravenswood. Walter sold his share of the family estate to William and used the money to purchase a house in the countryside, far from London and its gossip, where Rose could run through meadows and climb trees and grow up wild and free. I never saw William again, though he wrote occasionally short letters that spoke of estate matters and social obligations, but never of the past we shared. I think he was relieved to be free of me, of the constant reminder of his father's sins. I hoped he would find some measure of peace, though I suspected it would always elude him. As for me, I found something I had never dared to hope for. I found love, real and true and uncompromising. I found a daughter who called me Mama and climbed into my lap for stories every night. I found a husband who looked at me as though I were the most precious thing in the world, who held me close through nightmares and laughed with me through bright mornings, who built a life with me brick by brick, day by day. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I would take out the letter that had started everything. The cream-colored envelope with its dark red seal, the hurried handwriting, the words of love and longing that had been meant for another but had found their way to me. I never showed it to Rose. It belonged to a time before she could understand, a time of secrets and shadows that I wanted to protect her from. But I kept it, tucked away in a drawer with my most treasured possessions, a reminder of how quickly everything can change. A letter misdirected, a truth uncovered, a life transformed. I had entered my marriage as a woman resigned to emptiness, convinced that love was something that happened to other people, that happiness was a luxury I would never afford. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. On my wedding night to Walter, as we lay tangled together in the darkness of our new home, he whispered something against my hair that I've never forgotten. "I knew from the moment I met you," he said, "that you were someone extraordinary. I just had to wait for you to discover it yourself." I turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude and joy and fierce burning love that filled my heart. "I know now," I said. "I finally know." Outside, the spring rain fell soft against the windows, washing the world clean. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and somewhere down the hall, our daughter slept peacefully in her bed. I had found my way home at last, not to a house or an estate or a title, but to something far more precious. I had found my way to love.